And that really brings us to the next question is obviously, where do the Mets pivot? And if you are expecting them to just throw money at the loss of Yamamoto, you might be out of luck. Both reporters, Andy Martino and Will Salmon, specified that the Mets are not expected to pursue any high-end arms in free agency, including pitchers like Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery, who are expected to receive 6+ year deals on the market. Other sources have linked the Mets among 5 to 6 teams to possibly pursue 30-year-old Japanese left-handed pitcher Shota Imanaga as a fallback option from Yamamoto, who is projected to earn up to $100 million on the market. Reports have also linked the Mets to other back-end options such as Lucas Giolito, Sean Manaea, and Michael Lorenzen. The Mets are expected to pursue at least 2 more starting pitchers on the market after already adding right-handed pitcher Luis Severino on a 1-year deal and swinging a trade with Milwaukee this week, which we'll get to in a moment. I think that the typical Mets fan can obviously be a little bit upset that the Mets would pursue Yamamoto, the top pitcher on the market, and then just kind of pivot to, okay, we're not going to try and replace this void that was filled with not getting Yoshinobu Yamamoto. This is not really me just giving the Mets flowers of what they're doing here, because I want to see the Mets obviously spend money, but I think that this is the smart thing to do. And the reason why I say this is because there's quite a drop-off on the free agent market after Yoshinobu Yamamoto of high-risk pieces that will most likely get more than they're obviously worth. And listen, I understand having to overpay on the market, but I also understand the need to overpay or the want to overpay for a target that you really are just not as intrigued into. And the Mets did this last year, and I really still don't like that they did it, and obviously it did not work out, was obviously losing Jacob deGrom and then just kind of panicking and going to Justin Verlander. The Mets really just, at that point, they did not want to accept that Jacob deGrom is not replaceable. What you were getting from Jacob deGrom, the type of talent, the type of production that you were getting from Jacob deGrom, it wasn't replaceable. You couldn't replace an ace. You know, they kind of just dug a mess. They're still paying that salary this year to Justin Verlander for him to not even pitch. What the Mets needed to do was accept that Yoshinobu Yamamoto, what the Mets needed to do was accept that deGrom wasn't replaceable and bring in a bunch of guys who could be number 3s or back-end pieces or give you innings or protect the rotation. They needed to replace the quality of Jacob deGrom with the quantity of Jacob deGrom. And this is how I kind of feel with it with Yoshinobu Yamamoto, a potential ace, somebody who is in the prime of his career, who is going to be great for many, many years to come once he comes to the major leagues. Where they have to pivot to is basically a quantity of arms who can either give you innings, you can slot into the rotation that have some upside, guys who you can take some bets on or something like that. That's how you can basically fill the rotation. I obviously have talked about this before. The Mets, with the strong possibility of most likely using a 6-man rotation this year, even without Yamamoto. There's obviously Kodai Senga, who used to pitch once a week in Japan, and they kind of had to utilize that a little bit and kind of shake that up throughout the season last year. And then also you have guys like Luis Severino, who they just brought in, who was hurt a lot for the last 3-4 years. And, you know, maybe they need to provide a little bit more protection, give him that extra day of rest, and keep everybody healthy. We've seen David Stearns do this in the past, expand the rotation to 6 arms, and everybody stays healthy. Everyone is able to give you 25 starts, 23 starts. You don't have to continue to recycle the in and out of this rotation. And listen, I understand there's some Mets fans out there and there's some baseball fans, they like the pitch every 5 days. There's the traditionalists of everything like that. I think that there's more PTSD that comes to this whole situation with the 6-man rotation that I'm willing to give it a try. And the reason why I say that is because of the history that we've seen recently of basically just wasting potential for years and years to come. As we all know, that deGrom, Harvey, Syndergaard, Matz, Wheeler, rotation, all of those guys, they were all great when they came up here. And they look like the piece of this team that was going to carry us through playoff runs for years and years to come. The problem was, and this is a crazy stat, the 5 of those guys were never healthy at the same time. They were only healthy once for a turn throughout the rotation. Now, listen, I'm not saying that Lucas Giolito and Sean Manaea and Michael Lorenzen and all of these guys in the rotation are going to carry us like that young pitching staff did to the World Series. What I'm saying is that you need to keep your arms healthy, especially when you look at the depth options that are in-house that you don't really trust that much. I want to see the Mets try a six-man rotation to keep everybody healthy. I also want to see some of the prospects come up here and make some starts in the major leagues. Mike Vassell is somebody that we've talked about. Christian Scott is a possibility that we could see here. Blade Tidwell might be another year away. But we have a few prospects out there who could make a start here. They cannot be plugged into the rotation. I hate plugging in prospects and not going out and getting these pieces because you have a prospect. And obviously this is a different situation. We're not talking about pitching, but the Mets pursued Correa. Brett Beatty didn't stop them from doing that. Francisco Alvarez didn't stop them from getting Omar Narvaez. Mark Vientos didn't stop them from keeping Daniel Vogelbach and Darren Ruff here for so long. Guys like Drew Gilbert, who could possibly be in the majors this year, that should not stop them from going after a corner outfielder. You can't plug prospects in, and that goes the same with the pitching. As for some of the options out there, they're not the sexiest. I think we can all establish that they are not the number one guys that you would go after. Lucas Giolito, I think, could be solid. You're going to have to utilize his talents a little bit more. If you could get him back to that 94 to 95 miles an hour that he was throwing a few years ago, he probably could be a very effective pitcher. The main thing with Giolito is that he gives up a lot of hard contact. He gives up a lot of home runs, a lot of fly balls. That's the main reason why he probably should never be moved to the bullpen if he's struggling as a starter. He does have a pitch setup that can be effective, but throughout like an entire league, it could be overexposed, and he has had those struggles recently. Sean Manaea, I actually think, is the most underrated arm on the market right now. I think he's got a fantastic fastball. He can contact manage a lot better than a lot of people think he can, and he definitely can give you innings. And, we'll talk about innings in a second with the acquisition that they did make. I think that Sean Manaea would be a really good addition. He's a lefty and give you a different look from the rotation if you believe in stuff like that. If you have guys like Stearns who can utilize these pitch mixes, they can get the best out of somebody like Sean Manaea or somebody like Lucas Giolito. Mike Lorenzen, I would kind of want to stay away from, but I wouldn't mind if they brought him in. I think that the quantity approach is what the Mets need to obviously go after. I understand it's not the sexiest way to do it, but if it can hold you to a trade deadline and keep you in the running for everything, you can make some of those moves at the deadline if you're looking to compete for a playoff run or something like that. But obviously getting too ahead of yourself on that. If the Mets actually want to fill this rotation, they need to fill this rotation with quantity. One of the biggest problems that we had last year, and it was clear as day, the starters would not go deep into games. Guys like Carrasco going out after 2 innings. Max Scherzer was going out after 3 innings most times because he was getting lit up. David Peterson is not somebody who can consistently give you 6, and he's not going to be giving you 6 because he's going to be injured for the first few months of the year. Tyler McGill, it doesn't seem like he can handle that workload, but we'll see what happens with him. Jose Quintana was out for most of the year, so he couldn't really save and give you those innings that you wanted to get from him. We're taxing a bullpen so much that obviously did not have enough talent. They had a lack of explosiveness in that bullpen, and it just became a recipe for lots of blowout losses, and the pitching just basically collapsing on of itself, and they were just running on fumes in the middle of June last year, and that was a problem. So if you can bring in Lucas Giolito or Sean Manaea or somebody that could give you innings with quality stuff, you may have a chance of not taxing the bullpen. And that's what I think that the Mets need to obviously look at right now, where they just get a bunch of weapons they can use and not just going after the sexiest picks. Blake Snell ain't going to solve anything. I can tell you right now, it's not going to solve anything. That's someone who I'm not willing to give a long-term deal to. He just won the Cy Young. He had a fantastic year, but he's 30 years old right now. We've seen inconsistencies with Blake Snell before. There's been times where he walks 10 batters. There's been times when he strikes out 10 batters. There's inconsistencies there, and that's not the type of thing that I want to commit to on a 6-year deal. Speaking of 6-year deals, in the terms of just the full-on term, Jordan Montgomery is not somebody I would give a 6-year deal to. I'm giving 6 years, 7 years to aces, front-line arms. Jordan Montgomery is a good pitcher. At his best, he could be a 2. But at his typical state, throughout the stretch of a young season, he ain't worth 6 years. He is not worth 6 years. He's going to get it. He'll probably get something similar to the market of what Carlos Rodon got. He definitely just does not seem worth it to put on the payroll for 6 years. On his typical day, he's a number 3 in a rotation. But I'm not giving 6 years to someone who can flip-flop between 2 and 3 throughout the entire season. I think that Jordan Montgomery is a good pitcher. It's nothing against him or anything. At his typical stage, he's not a number 2. He's not an ace. He's not a number 1 guy. He's not a featured piece to your rotation. And that's the main reason why I would not go all in for guys like Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, these other pieces that, they're both on the cusp of the age of 30. And it seems very simple to say, but they're just not Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They're just not, but I just don't think it's the best situation for the Mets to panic and throw money at a top guy on the free agent market because they missed out on somebody else, where they're just going to full on overpay for somebody who there was no reason to overpay for. There was a reason, there was a motive to overpay for somebody like Yoshinobu Yamamoto. He was young. He had a lot of upside. He was going to be good for a very long time. These guys, Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, they're not relatively young. They're not relatively old or anything, but it just does not seem worth it. Like, I am not willing to shell out 6-7 years to Blake Snell just because he just won the Cy Young. To be honest, I think that they did that with Justin Verlander last year. He won the Cy Young, and they threw all this money at him. Obviously, it's a shorter deal and everything. They pivoted to him in less than 24 hours from when DeGrom left. So the main reason why I think the Mets need to be very careful with this, address quantity, assess talent, do things like that with the pitching, things that David Stearns has been able to do, and they should not just full on panic, spend money to spend money. And that has really just gotten them in trouble recently. And I just think that that's the way that they need to approach this pitching market. There's no real reason for the Mets to just shell out something against Blake Snell because they're angry about losing out on Yoshinobu Yamamoto. About 99.9% of free agents are not the Yoshinobu Yamamoto type. They're not 25 years old. They're not 26 years old. It's really hard to just see Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery as a backup plan. There also has been talks about Shota Imanaga, who I think has a better fastball than Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Better shape. He can't contact manage as well as Yamamoto. He's not Yamamoto. He's not as good as him. Shota Imanaga is a good pitcher. Do I think at best he's a 3? Maybe a 2. If all goes right, maybe he's a 2. At best, he is a number 3, but it's somebody that I definitely would go after. I definitely would be willing to give 4 or 5 years to Shota Imanaga, who I know that maybe if all goes well, he could be a number 2 in the rotation. He could be a number 3 in the rotation. I understand he's also 30 years old, so I obviously would have a little bit of a limit on that too. If Imanaga were to come up to the Mets and say, 5 years, $100 million, and I'll sign with you, I definitely would be open to do that. Again, I don't think Imanaga is as good as Yamamoto. Nobody should think that. I think Yamamoto is going to be ace for a long time. And, if that's their biggest free agency signing, that's their biggest free agency signing. And listen, overall, when you're seeing other teams spend money and the Mets aren't spending money, I've said this many times, if you didn't want an offseason like this, then don't hire Billy Epler. You look at what he did with the Angels, not assessing talent the right way, just basically signing guys to sign them and just like patching things up at the wrong time, not providing depth, just making a top-heavy roster and just mismanaging a lot of things. So if this is the bridge year, it is the bridge year, whatever. But the Mets obviously needed to address the future of the team. They couldn't just spend money to spend money. I think that the Mets are in a really good spot as to where they have tons of tools that they can address the quality with quantity and just basically balance that out on the roster to make a competitive roster. And that's what I think that they're trying to do. I don't think they're giving up on the offseason. I don't think that they're just going to full on tank for their draft pick or whatever. I think that what the Mets really want to do right now is assess talent and not just throw money at the situation as a panic pivot move. One player is not going to solve it, and the Mets really do know that.